This is Page Open, a program on the South Bridge Street Live Network. I'm Charles Alexander. I am a poet, a bookmaker, the head of the creative writing program at the University of Houston, Victoria, and have many other roles, all having to do with books and with poetry for the most part, publishing them, writing them, helping others to learn about and succeed with them. This program is particularly about poetry and books, and we've done programs now on specific poets, programs on a particular kind of book, and I've done one program where I read some of my own work. Today I'd like to step back and just a little more general about what is a poem anyway? What is it? I get students that come in and they think a poem has to be in stanzas. It has to rhyme. It has to have a certain kind of meter. It has to have images and metaphor. Actually, there's not any specific definition of anything a poem has to be. So the more definitions that center on something like energy do it a better job. Now, William Carlos Williams, the great American poet of the first part of the 20th century, wrote that a poem is a small or large machine made of words. Another poet of his time, Ezra Pound, talked about a ball of light in one's hands, and also that poetry should be language charged with meaning to the utmost degree. Emily Dickinson, you could call her the grandmother of American poetry. However, it's hard to imagine her ever as a grandmother since she died at a still fairly young age and did not have children herself. But she said in a letter, I know something is poetry when it takes my head off. I did once have a teacher who said he didn't really want to have a lobotomy in order to have to understand poetry, but he appreciated too that sense of something opening up in a poem, some intensity in there that carried you to a different place. This is an essential difference, I think, between poetry and the novel. The novel may have moments where that sense of intensity is absolutely there, but it tends to go to those moments as climaxes and come down from them and build towards them. A poem has it as much of the time as possible. And it is not unrelated to what someone might think of as a sudden realization of something. What gets called in relation to James Joyce and other modernist work an epiphany, a moment at which suddenly something is clear or something is new to one. This is also related to the great psychiatrist Sigmund Freud's sense of the uncanny being suddenly when you come up to something that is not understandable in ways that you are used to understanding them, something in the mind goes, oh, and you're in a different sense of awareness, a different sense of learning. This is what one hopes a poem can do. So certainly rhyme is fine in poems. Certainly stanzas are fine, meter is fine, but it's not necessary. What is necessary is something that brings that energy into the poem that seems to be essential. Poems can exist in prose. Well, I have one friend that says no, they can't. They have to be in lines. But we've had prose poems for more than a century now. Certainly in the 1800s, the great French poet Charles Baudelaire wrote poems in prose, and he was not the first. Poems have existed that haven't had rhyme in them. Well, Shakespeare didn't rhyme in a lot of the poetic passages in his plays. John Milton wrote at one point that rhyme was a kind of abomination. William Wordsworth, in the beginning of the 19th century, said that poems should be written in the language of common speech. and he wrote in what's called blank verse, which is a form of 5 sort of stresses or beats in a line, but it's not in stanzas and it's not rhymed. So all kinds of things poems can do. There are one-word poems. There are 1,000-word poems. There are poems that have unfolding accordion pages. There are poems that are performances. I just want to read a few different things by a couple of different poets just to show some differences. First, I'm going to read something by the British poet Tom Rayworth from his selected poems, 1987 to 1995. Tom is one of the masters of this art and someone I was pleased to know and to introduce a couple of times. He's no longer with us and much missed. And this book is called Clean and Well Lit. So I thought I'd read 2 or 3 just quite different kinds of poems that look different on the page, that have different forms, and that work in different ways. The first is by Tom Rayworth, one of our recently deceased masters, a British poet, but who made many trips to America and was well known here. And this is a poem from his book Clean and Well Lit, selected poems 1987 to 1995, and it's titled Rainbow. It is in 4-line stanzas. Each line only has anywhere from 2 to 4 or 5 words, and so it moves in these little steps. Tom himself was fond of reading really quickly, and I can't probably do that at all, but hopefully I'll do this poem justice. It's called Rainbow. You know, poets do write about beautiful things sometimes, although this rainbow you will see is rather complicated. Reading them as omens, even centuries achieve the self as internal to explain complex events. Approximations that swing past time, sour in the balancing of grids and confusions. In favor of an orange, the excitement of hostilities, both with their illusion within the flight time. Narrators who improvise highly visible disintegration to disadvantage eyes, apparently sufficiently impatient. Backdrop crowds on radio, edge much more pronounced, framed visual calendars aspired to composition. On the seasonal rhythms that entangle events in folded temporal nations, nuclear submarines lurk. Where possible, abandon the concept, space that once limited fever, noisy and inescapable, to arrive simultaneously. Not necessarily an easy poem at all, but part of the joy, I think, of a poem is that it needs your attention, and sometimes it needs more than one reading. So that was Rainbows by Tom Rayworth. And now I want to read something by a very young poet, and this is just a book that arrived in the mail to me a few days ago. And it's by a poet who goes by the pen name Wawa. Her name is actually May Wa Lo, and she lives in California. She is Asian American, and I'm going to read both a letter that's included in this and then a poem that follows the letter, or part of a poem. Dear Anna, when I open my eyes and live, there is one world. When I close my eyes and sleep, there is another world. I am alive in both all the time, every day. There are worms, haunted hens, undying men out there. Watch out. I'm still alive after many days of life. When I can't change things, I translate them into your unspoken. Sometimes I think your life is kinder than mine, but sometimes it's kinder than you. Sometimes I'm kinder than you. Today there was a sky out there, clouds and no birds. I didn't hear or see anything. Hands stretching out of the walls, the ceiling, and the floor found me alive. My face fell out 3 times into my hands. I pressed down the mouths popping out around my mouth. I have finished this day. Yours truly, Anna. So that Dear Anna, from Anna. And this is part of a poem titled Anna. In this poem, talking about form, it has on the top of the page words in what looks like a typewriter script spread out left and right on the page. And if you can see this, and on the bottom of the page, it has a more conventional kind of 3-line or 4-line stanzas that are symmetrical or centered on the page. It's almost 2 different voices or movements. And it's titled Drawing 103. Interestingly, the poet is also a visual artist. Beginning blackness, ring of cirrus, accidental wings, exhales, mountainous mist, misted black remains, misted black places. One burned tree, alive, bearing the sun. Ripped mountain, emptied silhouette. Coincidence, almost wrong. She left her ankles tied to the seafloor, swimming up for a way out. A blue mountain as wide as the sky will finish her alive. When there is no distance ahead, she'll do a handstand, carry on in the sky. Just to give you a little bit about this work, Anna and Anna, which is the name of the book, is a title with only one vowel, the A, singing the names and the connection between the names. The poem begins with 2 brush strokes, after image, an island, whose chords, because it does sound like music, also chime with that initial A in Anna, after image, an island. So you were met with a kind of collage that combines an open page composition with things moving all over the page with a symmetrical shaping at the bottom of the page, both rich in color and image and in a mindfulness that values the asking of questions like, can you peel the skin off these colored marbles? Because these poems want to find not answers, but further thought in the, quote, wakeful dream, unquote, in which we live. There are echoes here of Zen Buddhist poems by wandering monks. You gazed at yourself, I swatted a fly. Set amid a world of color formulas that are very much of our contemporary digital moment. The 2 worlds, when eyes are open and when sleep comes, are where we live, and we are always translating our worlds for ourselves and for connection with others, with a chance in translation of finding a better place. The reader finds herself or himself included and translated here in this exceedingly beautiful landscape of language between the sky and the ocean, and between the ocean and the lava. Anna and Anna. It's an intense shore fully awakened. Quite an accomplishment. That's a little statement about the book that I wrote. I was asked to write by the publisher of the book. Okay, I think I'll just read a little bit of one other thing, because we've had one poem in 4-line stanzas. We haven't had any rhymes. I'm not going to give you any today. And we've had one with this what we call open field composition, moving all over the page, and a symmetrical composition. Here's part of a poem in prose, and this is from my book, At the Edge of the Sea, from a work called Some Sentences Look for Some Periods. I tell myself that nothing can be perfect. I tell myself in nothing words that nothing words that can be perfect. I tell nothing myself, nothing words. I tell myself words. Once a butterfly, then a burning hand, a memory of a burning hand. Everyone left me at 8 years old, so I left too, walking a road out of the city toward a lake. Step 1 and 2. A piano next to the mirror. My sister has beautiful red hair and she plays piano. Notes are sometimes red. Near the piano, I tell my mother's hard-drinking friend to leave the house. After Tennyson, I always hear the bells, the beauty of a bell. To cry with a beast, truly the only human present, also lost in Japan, wandering where water goes. The truck knocks me down and perhaps out. A baseball hits my head, and I remember waking up to the attention of worried faces. I tell them that nothing can be perfect. If my father lies full fathom 5, will I see him again? So, a poem can take different forms. Maybe what's common to all these poems is they don't necessarily begin knowing where they're going to end up. And I think this is very important. Robert Frost once wrote that if you know where a poem's going to go when you begin it, it doesn't make much sense to even write it. The poem is an exploration. One finds out in the act of writing and in the act of going through thinking the poem where it goes. Poetry is an adventure. Thanks for joining me today on Page Open.